let's move on to something that we're a little bit more informed about, I guess, which is something we've
Mm-hmm.
all watched. So, Steve, maybe remind us what allowed, what allowed this film to cross our paths. What made you choose the NeverEnding Story for our required viewing again?
I'm trying to remember. Well, I feel like it was mainly because we had done Brave Little Toaster, and like I had been thinking about like things from the '80s, like movies from the '80s, and you did Last Unicorn, and we were going through these things, and I was trying to think of an animated one. Nothing really popped in my mind immediately, but that week that we did Brave Little Toaster, I was talking to a friend of mine about the NeverEnding Story. I don't know if it was like tied into a Stranger Things conversation, possibly, but and just kind of made me realize that I hadn't seen it in a long time, and I knew, that I think it was on HBO Max and easily to watch, and um, yeah, so it felt like a good opportunity just to say, hey, I want to watch it again, and I can ask John and Ron to watch it with me. So it seemed like a
Hell
good
yeah.
choice. So
You can require us. It's not even an
that's
ask.
that's what it is. Yeah, it's like
It's
you
law.
can't say no. And but I mean, have you guys seen the movie? Both of you prior to this, or I made an assumption, but have either of you seen it?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
An
cool.
exorbitant
I didn't-
amount of times for me.
Okay, right. I think you mentioned that last
Yeah.
episode, but
Yeah, I was wondering about that, how it remained as a touchstone. Because I mean, I would have been sort of the right age for it. I guess I would have been 11 when it came out. I remember checking it out from the library and watching it after school one evening. That's all I remember. And I remember waiting for it because it was the kind of movie that, as a kid, you really wanted to see something that had like creatures and fantasy
Right.
realms and all that kind of stuff in it. But for whatever reason, it never really became one of my movies, and I don't think I've watched it since that day, since that
Oh,
afternoon
wow.
that I watched it. So for me, this really was like cracking open something that I had memories of, but not strong memories of at all.
Yeah.
And I all I knew was that it seems like people that came along a little bit after my generation, like maybe not different generation necessarily, but people who came along in the next 10 years, it seems. We're more likely to grow up with an attachment to this movie. So I don't
Yeah.
know.
yeah, that would definitely be like probably closer to mine and Ronald's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I definitely have like a affinity for this film, and I hadn't watched the German version or whatever that version that Ronald was mentioning on the last episode, and maybe I
Yeah.
should, but
I mean,
Um,
it's beautiful, but it also doesn't have any of the themes of it at the beginning or the end. And then they put this like weird accent on the character with the hat. He has like this like I don't know in the
character with the
American
hat.
version, does he have this like remember when they go to there's like the snail character, the snail that goes really
Oh.
fast.
Yeah.
The guy has
the
like
guy
this,
that rides the snail, yeah,
what kind of accent does he have in the American version?
He's that's Deep Roy, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yes,
And I believe he is doing sort of a almost like he's doing like a British accent, but not a very good one.
Okay. In the German cut, he has a southern accent. He's like, "Come on, guys, what are you doing right now?"
Maybe
Like,
he's
it is-
doing maybe it's a bad southern accent, but either way,
No, no,
it's
no,
one of those.
no. The accents are different. Like they
Oh,
did a
okay.
different voiceover for the character. I'm not sure why. I'm not sure what the German cut has. It's a lot of choices were made in the OG version versus the updated American one that eventually came like a year after or so that the movie was made or something like that. But
right.
what a weird choices. But I guess because we love it. John, what the fuck did you think of this movie, man? What did you think of such an interesting? Because I'm curious, man. Because we obviously hold this thing pretty close to the heart.
I would almost rather hear you guys talk about what it is that makes it strike such a chord with you, and then
Sure.
we can talk about just the experience for me of watching it. I mean, it's a weird movie, but it does have a different energy than a lot of other movies of its type in a way. I mean, so, but I wouldn't. I mean, I don't have like. It was just wild. I mean, I guess
Yeah.
my short response would be that it's just full of things that they really go for it, and it's hard not to enjoy the kind of older tech, pre CGI sort of
Yeah.
way of doing a world like this. But that's also a real limitation on this movie. And I just looked; it was a $60 million budget, which was a lot, I guess, for those days.
Yeah.
Um, and well, no, it's about United States maybe 25 to 27 million. So it was a 60 million Deutschmark budget, which is a weird way to record it on but I guess it was a German production. But it made about $100 million US in the box office. So I suppose
Wow.
it was enough of a success that it did
Yeah.
spawn sequels and had like a cultural imprint. But it isn't, it reminds me honestly of The Last Unicorn, which we watched a couple episodes ago, because it's like a fantasy story that has a weird dreamlike energy and a weird dreamlike pace to it. It doesn't feel the same as, like I said, others of its type. It's a little bit different, and that's where
Yeah.
I'm really curious to hear what it is that what a couple super fans love about it.
I mean, for me, I can kind of have like that reference point that you kind of were describing. Like I can remember like watching this, like getting that rental from like the library or something. Like you get that bag with the white snaps at the top on the handle. I don't know if you remember those when you used to rent the movies from the
Yes,
library.
for sure, man.
But I don't know. I just have like very vivid memories of like watching this movie with my mom, and just like much like the characters watching it or reading his book in the movie, like on like rainy days, and like I was home from school, or like we were off of school, or things like that. Just like Bastion was like watching or reading this book. I feel like I would do the same with this movie. Like I would just put this movie on and watch it. And I mean, to be honest, like when it came out, I was only 3 years old or 4 years old, so I definitely obviously came to it on home video, and a few years later. But I think what stood out to me, and in the times that I've watched it since, and even the most recent viewing of it, is definitely like kind of how surreal and dark the fantasy is in this story. And I really always remembered liking how like the story in Fantasia starts out, as the movie goes on. I always loved how like the story that Bastion's reading and the Fantasia that we see through his story is so bright and beautiful. And as the story goes, like you can see the nothing basically encompassing that world, as Atreyu tries to find this cure.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, like as a kid, like I don't want to like be like excessive in saying this, but like I feel like it was one of the first memories I had of like a style, like a choice in a movie almost, like,
Yeah.
it was a family film. It was a fantasy film. There were moments in Bastion's world that were very scary. And like, as the story got scarier, like there was things in his world that were scaring him more. Like just this idea of like the parallelism and, the fact that there are dark things in the story, and there's dark things in your world, and there are bright things that keep your world alive. There was so much parallel storytelling happening as he's reading this book. And I honestly just, I think there's iconic characters in the movie. Like everyone just mentioned, I didn't even say Falcor, or Stonebiter, like things like that. I remember these characters. I'm over 40, I just turned 41 last week, and I'm just like, I'm talking about the NeverEnding Story still, and very passionately, because it's definitely one of my favorite movies of like that era of my life. And when I look back on it, the more I think about it, it's like I really valued how dark it got. And I kind of felt the same way about like a movie like Labyrinth, and years later Princess Bride would do the same kind of storytelling, where you're kind of like reading a story and seeing the fantasy and the excitement in both worlds and things like that. But I don't know, the NeverEnding Story always just stood out to me, maybe because it was like one of the first ones I'd seen like that. And again, as a kid that probably watched it when I was probably 6 or 7 years old, if not younger, like maybe that was too young, but I just remember how dark it felt, amongst other things that I was probably watching at that time. But still so optimistic, like, and so there's so much still about it that that was like fantastical to me. And that's not to be funny, like with Fantasia, but like, I just think that the way that world was presented, and the journey that Atreyu was on, was just so cool to me. And like, his name is Atreyu, and is like, it's a dragon called Falcor, and there's like the whole Artax scene is like something that will scar you for life, depending when you've seen that movie.
Yeah.
And that's just those like key things. Like I feel like a lot of people of our age know this movie. They know those scenes. They know those characters. They're kind of iconic, and I think it's just like stained in my mind. And it's just like the main reason I love it is just because it's like I find it to be very rewatchable. It's like one of those comfort watches for me. You know, like I just put this on, I could watch this movie so easily. But I don't know. Yeah. What about you, Rana? What kind of what's the big takeaways that you find like the reasons why you hold it in high
Um,
regards?
I was a undersized kid with a really squeaky voice. And I was, I was scared. I was scared of the fucking world because I was like, you know, I was the oldest of my family, but I was also that small kid with a really squeaky voice and no one really was scared of or took seriously. And I was
Right.
nerdy and it didn't feel like that mattered. It's just like that doesn't matter that you have these pockets of obsession. And I see this movie with this kid that doesn't look like me, but his experiences are pretty similar, right?
Right.
And I'm like, and this is the first movie that I saw besides uh maybe Rainbow Bright, because the Rainbow Bright movie really where music was like pivotal. Like I'm like, this is adult music in a kid's movie. Like it felt like orchestral stuff used in a way that I had never really heard as a kid in a movie. And it was like, Aaron had never seen the NeverEnding Story, right? She
Wow.
was like a kid. You watched this as a kid? I'm like, yeah. She's like, the horse died.
Yeah.
People are dying and they don't come back at the end of the movie for some of these characters. I'm like, yeah, this was it for me. Like it was there was permanence about it, right? So like as a kid, I'm like, oh, things could die. And
Yeah. Not to mention that Gamorg is like frightening.
yes. It's like
Yeah.
all those elements. And people don't help him all the time. Like when Atreyu goes to the big like turtle and he's just like, no, I can't help you. And he just sneezes on him. He's like, that's it. He doesn't help him. Like it's so weird to watch a movie that had so much realism in terms of like your journey being fucking hard and people not helping you sometimes, that really resonated with me as a kid and really still resonate with me now. So like Erin's watching this movie with me, she's like, this is so fucking dark. This is
Yeah.
not a kid's movie I would have enjoyed as a kid. And I'm like, this was like my lifeblood. This is like my access to like, I got brave through this movie. I was like, I can face anything. If he could,
Right.
if he could come out of this trash can. And I got
Yeah.
bullied
Right.
a little bit, man. Like I was, like I said, I was really small, like to the point where like people didn't think I was in the grade I was in
Right.
ever.
Right.
They're like, you're in the first grade. You look like you're in pre-K. So anyway, that's neither here nor there. So this movie fucking hit me like a ton of bricks. Plus, there were titties in the movie. When they got to the gate, like it was like my adult movie that I couldn't really like my mom
Statue.
statues, man. Like, and my mom would like let me see this movie, and I'm just
Hey,
like,
John, you take
yeah,
what you can get, man. You take what
No,
you
I
can
just
get.
I just wanted to be clear that if in case anyone's thinking, wait,
Yeah,
where
she's
did, I
not
miss,
like,
did I
right.
miss something? It's just like there's a couple of like what do you call those?
Topless Sphinx sort of
Are
characters.
those they're not sphinxes though. What do you call the ones with the wing? They almost are like harpies, but I don't think that's what they are. But at any rate,
But yeah, that stuff was like huge for me. It had all these elements. It was
So
violent. Go.
yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Go
No,
ahead.
it
Go
was
ahead, Steve.
violent.
It was
No, so hey,
violent,
that
and it had breasts in it, and it was an adventure. And I'm not even gonna lie to you, man.
John.
I was to say that I was in love with the childlike empress is an understatement. She had the
yeah,
prettiest face I'd ever seen in my life.
you're
And
right.
it was like really hard for me to process as a kid. I was just like, why do I feel like fireworks are in my fucking head? And it's just her face. It's like nothing really, like she has this really soft voice. And it was like
Yeah.
overwhelming to me. It was overwhelming to me.
Yeah.
This this girl. So all that stuff together, and Atreyu was so fucking cool around her. I'm like, I would never be like that around this guy. I'd be like, oh yeah.
But like I said though, his name is Atreyu. You know what I mean? That's a good start.
Yeah.
Now, I was gonna just say that, like, and even listening to you talk about it, it's like that's the tie back to The Last Unicorn, because there were like those hidden titties on that tree, and then our jump forward to Werewolf by Night, because Gamork is like a scary fucking werewolf, and I was like, this is what we do here. We just tie it all together. You know what I mean? Synergy.
Yeah,
okay, yeah. John, where are you at on this?
I mean, I think I'm responding to the weird nature of what you guys are talking about. The fact that this is a movie that has like a kid, like he starts off the movie, his mother has died, and Gerald McCraney is there. It's before he's aged into playing, William Randolph Hearst, or is that who he played? No, he didn't play Randolph Hearst. He played
Major Dad.
I can't remember which. It was Hearst on Deadwood though, but I don't remember which. It was like
what, for real?
Yeah,
I see him as Major Dad,
and he was one of the Simon brothers on Simon and Simon.
Yes.
But yes, Major Dad was perhaps his most name brand, his production for years.
What? I gotta go back and watch.
Now, you remember Hearst, right? The villain of season 3 and the movie was the dad in this. But I love, so and the darkest thing is that whatever the dad's making in the blender with that raw egg, that he slowly drinks. I feel like that was just Gerald McCraney on the set being like, I'm going to show everybody I can slowly sip this disgusting beverage. That's how tough I am. But I don't know, like the darkness of the mom having died, and the darkness of the kid getting bullied, and he kind of goes and hides, and the darkness of the horse sinking into the quicksand or the quick mud, and some of the stuff. I would argue they do undo pretty much everything that bad that happened. All the characters that seem to have perished are back at the end. We see them. So I really don't think it quite has the
that's heaven.
Like, well, but no, it's wish time, and it's an interesting thing that he just gets unlimited wishes at the end. And it's like, can I get more wishes? And it's like, yeah. And it's funny that they don't show him immediately wishing for his mom to be alive. Like that was the thing that really stuck with me. Was like his first words weren't "bring my mom back." It was like, and then I might bring some other people back too. But no. I mean, again, I'd heard about the death of Atrax the horse. As I know that it scarred people of a certain age, and somehow that missed me when I was 11. Like I may have not been paying as much attention as I could have been. I was probably having an afternoon much like the kid in the movie, and was kind of zoning in and out. My life was getting crazy around watching this movie. I can remember being in the den and trying to watch a movie that was just for me while household stuff was happening around me, and just not being able to finish it well. But I guess I thought that character of the horse and their relationship was going to be built up a little bit more before he died. But it's like, okay, we meet Atreyu, we get sent on the mission. He hooks up with the horse. The next scene, they're in the mud. It's like I felt like I didn't get to spend enough time with the horse. But I do agree that if I take it back to being a kid and watching this, and I'm not thinking about like, this story's too episodic. I can totally imagine how traumatizing it would be for the horse. Like I know how I felt when I was watching stuff at that age. How like, if two characters were together, I instantly wanted them to be like buddies and go on an adventure together. So the fact that the horse is out of the picture so early, they do sort of earn it a little bit by having him really linger on it and he talks about it. And later when he sees an image, but I sort of feel like, oh, there's this whole idea of this relationship that he had with the horse that I didn't get to see. But I think the movie sketches a lot of things like that in. So I think that it is sort of like, it's an interesting movie. It's yet another one of these movies that approaches it from outside of the norm. This isn't a Disney movie. This isn't a Lucasfilm production. This is a little bit different, and it's somebody trying to figure out something different, or a different way into that kind of mythic storytelling. And it does have a sort of gloominess to it and a weirdness to it. And you talk about Gamork, the sort of evil spirit, the fact that not only is he freaky looking and scary, even the animatronic aspect of him could look kind of phony, kind of adds to the creepiness of him. But just those eyes shining in the dark and that mouth, the way that Gamork is like wounded and seems equally afraid as he is dangerous. I think, that was interesting. I mean, I feel like there's some interesting philosophical things going on in this movie for sure. And I think I respond well to that. The part that I think I mentioned before about just the episodic nature of it. Those are the things that prevented me from really like latching onto it as like, oh, this great saga or something that I could really think about. However, I think the presence of those dark elements and dwelling on death and dwelling on like even Gamork seems to have this kind of like it's part of something that's dying out in this world. It's like the nothing is kind of wiping out Gamork as well. And
Yeah.
the one other thing I would say is I love seeing practical effects. One thing that's funny about watching movies that use practical effects as much as possible, which I guess was the height of technology back then, is that back then people are spoiled now because they show you everything. Like if something happens, you see it happen. Back then, they did what they could, and if they didn't quite get it on camera, they used sound effects or a quick edit or a reaction shot. There's a few times in this movie where whatever happens, particularly with Gamork, like there's an early scene where he's chasing Atreyu through the swamp, where it's not really clear what happens at the end of that chase, you know? And then when Gamork attacks Atreyu out of the cave, it's a similar moment where like, okay, we know he jumps out, and we can see that they tussle, and we can see that Gamork gets got, but you don't really see any of that happen. Whereas now that would be a 5-minute or 10-minute battle sequence, you know. And
Yeah.
I don't know that the storytelling is that much better just because we're so hooked on seeing everything. So I don't know. And also I will say that there's a scene early on where everything's kind of red. They're just in a red sort of world, and it's basically just red tinted. I mean, no, it's like an old school effect. Stuff like that really works on me. So I think, yeah, this was a movie that kept me interested throughout, even if it didn't quite work the nostalgic spell that it had for you guys. Because I can tell when you talk about these characters, they have sort of an iconic importance to you, you know, and that's just not something you have unless something gets in at that age, or at least with this type of story, I think. But I can totally see what it is that people latched onto about it. And like I said, I think the handmade effects, the physical effects, I think that stuff just gets. It's like it never gets more phony looking. It's just as phony looking as it was the day that they put the movie out. But it gets a little more charming every day because it is a representative of a way they used to make movies that they just don't anymore. So there's a little bit more of that. If you suspend your disbelief and get into it, maybe it's a little bit more magical when something isn't so modern. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah. I just think that there's something so special about the movie, and I mean, this is kind of what I identify with. Just like Ronald was even hitting it a little bit. It's just, you know, just the experience of Bastion, you know, as however you can relate to him, whether it's how Ronald described, or if it's like, you know, you're a bookworm and you love these kinds of stories, you know, and you love reading fantasy, and there's like this want to be a part of the story and to see how he becomes a part of the story, to watch that play out in a movie was really cool, you know, at the age that I came to this film, and it's still cool to me. And I think that you know, it's just kind of like it felt like a pretty epic movie, you know, at that age. And kind of the intertwine, like how the real world and Fantasia kind of become intertwined as the story moves along. Like that was something pretty cool. I was going to say one of the things I was going to mention. I found the article in between the last few weeks when I rewatched it, to recommend anybody that is interested in NeverEnding Story. If you haven't watched it, obviously, I think we're all kind of saying check it out. But if you love NeverEnding Story, there's a really awesome oral history that EW did in 2019 for its 35th anniversary, with Wolfgang Peterson, the director, the three main stars of Atreyu, Bastion, and the Child Empress, and the singer of the song, you know, the NeverEnding Story song, that you can find on EW.com if you just search for, you know, NeverEnding Story. But it's an awesome. I love all those oral histories when they put those out, you know, when they really kind of get the whole cast and crew involved. But there's a really fun one where they just kind of talk about like kind of coming to the book and adapting it to the movie, and just the production stuff with all the practical effects and things like that. It's a great read if you enjoy this film, or if it has a special place in your, you know, your film history. I would recommend trying to find that article.
George Hurst.
George Hurst, yeah, that's
George Hurst on Deadwood.
That's the Deadwood character. That's right.
He's the predecessor to William Randolph Hearst, but
Okay,
yes.
gotcha.
Well, NeverEnding Story had sequels. How do they stack up? Do you guys have any thoughts about those movies?
They don't stack up at all.
They don't stack up.
They don't stack up. I kind of remember liking the second one, mainly because Jonathan Brandis was in it, and I loved Jonathan Brandis growing up. Rest in peace.
Sad.
Very sad. I remember I was a part of his fan club, and I got an autograph picture from him in the mail after I wrote him a letter. It was pretty awesome.
That is maybe
Um,
the most Steve thing
yeah,
that I've ever heard in my entire life. Is that you
yeah,
were in the Jonathan Brandis fan club.
dude. What did we have back in the late '80s, early '90s? There's nothing. You got the magazine. You're like, oh, join the fan club. Write a letter, and you write the letter, and you get a picture signed, like, hey, Steve, thanks for being a fan.
Allow 6 to 8 weeks for delivery.
Yeah, that's the key. And you got to postmark the letter so they can return it in the envelope. They don't pay for shipping.
Right.
But yeah, I remember liking the second one. Like, it's not. It was just kind of like a, the first one was a hit, so the third one's horrible, like really bad. I can't remember the actor's name that's in that one.
Supposedly the second one is taken from like the second half of the book. The book, The NeverEnding Story, is the basis. Like they only used about the first half of it for the first movie. So if the second one is good in any way, it might be that it's linked to the same source material.
Yeah.
Because everything you guys are talking about that imprinted on you about the kind of darkness and heaviness of some of the themes, a lot of that sound. I mean, I don't know this for a fact, but a lot of that sounds like those are literary ideas. Like maybe in the text, the book, it might have some of that kind of mournful quality to it, or this.
For sure.
I think that's part of a lot of fantasy stories. It's in the Lord of the Rings story. It's in The Last Unicorn. This idea that magic is kind of in danger, or the magic that's in our world could be lost in some way. And the nothing in the NeverEnding Story. I mean, that's what it is. It's the nothing. But it's
awesome.
That's a great simple concept for this kind of existential feeling that really is like a black hole that's going around sucking everything up.
Yeah.
Totally.
And then when you go through it, it's, you're in some other realm kind of like in the end. So it is very, also we should mention it has that meta aspect of the little boy reading the story being kind of visible to Atreyu. And at some point they kind of are aware of each other. And I thought that was
so cool, man.
That was neat. That was neat. And honestly, that was another concept that's played in a heavy way. It's not like they team up necessarily. It's not like the little boy who's hiding reading the book has to like clap his hands really loud to give Atreyu power or anything. It's just like they're bonded in some way that I wonder maybe in part 2, does that continue? Is that something that maybe was completed in a later part of the story?
Not really. No.
They're paired.
I mean, he's definitely aware. Like it's consistent in the sense that they're aware of one another, and the Bastion, who's played by Jonathan Brandis in the second one, does have like an impact on the story the same way that Bastion does in the first one. I was gonna say the other thing I remembered about the third one is that Jack Black is in it. It's like one of his earlier roles. He plays Slip.
Now I gotta rewatch it.
But yeah, I mean, it's a classic to me, no question. And again, like I said at the top, it's on HBO Max. If you want to check it out, it's there if you have a subscription. And I think that maybe in 2019, if you want the physical media, there's a couple different versions of like remastered versions that came out for the 35th anniversary.
Yeah.
That's out there too. But
don't get the German one. If you want to hear the theme song,
that's Ronald's take. That's a
gorgeous.
Don't
it's
get
a
the
gorgeous Blu-ray. It's a gorgeous 4K Blu-ray. But if you want the theme, get the American one that came out. Yeah.